Welcome. Take a moment and imagine this. You wake up on an ordinary autumn day and the world around you has suddenly changed. You drive to the gas station only to find a line of cars stretching for blocks. You wait in that line for hours, praying the fuel doesn't run out before it's your turn. The price on the sign seems to climb right before your eyes. And at the grocery store checkout, you realize with a sinking feeling that your money is losing value by the minute. This isn't a scene from an apocalyptic movie. This was the reality for millions of Americans in 1973. Now, fast forward to 2022. Europe, a winter looms, and the fear isn't just about the cold, but about whether there will be enough energy to heat their homes. Two different eras, two different continents, but the very same instrument of coercion. Not tanks, not missiles, but energy, oil and gas. This is the story of how the world first encountered the energy weapon in 1973 and how that old geopolitical playbook is being read by Vladimir Putin today. It's a story essential to understanding our present and our future, a tale of economic shock, geopolitical leverage, and the enduring quest for security in a world powered by volatile resources. Let's travel back to the early 1970s. The world was a very different place. America and its allies were living in an age of petroleum abundance. Cars were big, gasoline was cheap, and the post-war economic boom seemed limitless. The oil-rich nations of the Middle East were often viewed in Western capitals as wealthy, but ultimately junior partners. Their oil fueled Western progress, their political power seemed manageable. But this perception was a dangerous illusion, one shattered in an instant. It was October 1973. The Yom Kippur War erupted as Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. The United States, seeing its key ally in a precarious position, initiated a massive airlift of military supplies. This act of support was the spark that lit the fuse. In response, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, struck back, but not with soldiers or jets. They wielded a more subtle yet devastating weapon, the oil valve. They imposed a complete embargo on oil shipments to the United States and its allies, and simultaneously announced monthly production cuts of 5. The goal was simple, brilliant, and ruthless: to fracture Western support for Israel by attacking its economic foundation, its insatiable appetite for oil. What unfolded next was a masterclass in economic disruption. The images from that period are seared into the American psyche: endless, snaking lines of cars at gas stations, with tempers flaring and fistfights breaking out. The government implemented rationing through an odd-even system, where you could only buy gas on certain days based on your license plate number. But the chaos at the pump was just the visible symptom. The real damage went much deeper. The price of oil quadrupled almost overnight. This shockwave radiated through the entire global economy. The cost of everything from food to transportation to manufactured goods skyrocketed. The Western world was plunged into a brutal phenomenon known as stagflation, a terrifying combination of high inflation and economic stagnation that defied conventional economic wisdom. For the first time, the average person understood that their way of life was tethered to a resource that could be weaponized. The US government scrambled, imposing a national speed limit of 55 miles per hour, urging thermostat settings to be lowered, and even promoting car-free Sundays. The new bumper sticker, "Don't be a gas hog," became a symbol of a new, anxious era. The conclusion from this painful chapter was clear, and it reshaped global strategy forever. Control over a critical resource is not just an economic advantage, it is a strategic weapon. It can paralyze advanced nations and dictate foreign policy without a single bullet being fired. And this hard-learned lesson was carefully noted in other capitals around the world, where leaders sat on vast reserves of other potent resources. Now, let's make the leap forward, almost 50 years into the future. Europe in 2021, 2022. One would think the lessons of 1973 had been learned, yet a new, equally dangerous dependency had been woven into the fabric of the continent. This time, the dominant supplier wasn't a cartel of Middle Eastern nations, but a single resurgent Russia. Europe, and Germany in particular, had spent decades building an economic miracle on a foundation of cheap, reliable Russian natural gas. Pipelines like Nord Stream were touted as bridges of mutual dependency, making conflict between Russia and Europe unthinkable. It was a seductive theory, but it was an illusion. When Vladimir Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the West responded with a barrage of sanctions, and Russia countered, directly from the 1973 playbook. It began to use natural gas as a weapon. It started with technical issues and reduced flows, escalating into a complete cessation of gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline under patently false pretenses. The goal was identical to OPEC's 5 decades prior: to break Western unity, to sow panic, and to force Europe to abandon Ukraine out of fear of a frigid, dark winter. Once again, the familiar scenes played out, this time on a European stage. Wholesale gas prices increased tenfold. European governments launched frantic campaigns for energy conservation, urging citizens to take shorter showers and lower their heating. Energy-intensive industries, from fertilizer plants to glass manufacturers, began to shutter production. The threat of deindustrialization and social unrest became very real. This was not a conventional war on a battlefield. It was a calculated war of economic attrition, aimed at the very heart of European prosperity and solidarity. The parallel was uncanny and the conclusion inescapable. Vladimir Putin did not invent a new form of warfare. He simply reached for a time-tested strategy, dusted off the blueprint from 1973, and adapted it for his own ambitions and for a different resource, natural gas. It proved a timeless truth: energy weaponry does not become obsolete. The technologies and the specific resources may change, but the fundamental principle endures. He who controls the resource wields immense power. Yet the story does not end with the weapon, because for every weapon, a defense is eventually developed. The trauma of 1973 sent a shockwave through the Western world that forced a fundamental rethink of energy strategy. Look at the two most powerful geopolitical responses that define our world today. The first is the drive for energy independence. The United States, stung by the humiliation of the embargo, began a long concerted effort to unlock its own domestic energy resources. The result was the shale revolution. Through innovations in hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, the US transformed itself from the world's largest importer of oil into its largest producer. This was a geopolitical earthquake. It gave Washington a powerful new card to play in global affairs, reducing the leverage of traditional petrostates. The second, longer-term response is the green transition. Solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles are often discussed through a purely environmental lens. But their rise is also a direct geopolitical response to the vulnerability of fossil fuel dependence. A nation that generates its own electricity from renewables and powers its transport from its own grid is a nation that is far less susceptible to energy blackmail. It is a nation that has achieved a new form of sovereignty. We can see this dynamic playing out in real time. Look at Europe in the aftermath of Putin's energy war. The continent, faced with an existential threat, acted with breathtaking speed. Germany, once the poster child for reliance on Russian gas, raced to build floating LNG terminals to import gas from the United States, Qatar, and elsewhere. The EU accelerated its Repower EU plan, fast-tracking permits for renewable projects and setting ambitious targets for green hydrogen. On a micro level, sales of heat pumps skyrocketed as homeowners sought to decouple from the volatile gas market. It was a painful, costly, but remarkably swift pivot away from a dangerous dependency. The takeaway from this is the most crucial one. The trauma of 1973 provided the strategic blueprint for the 21st century. That blueprint has two pillars. First, secure your energy needs in the short term through diversification and domestic production, and second, aggressively pursue a long-term future free from the geopolitical shackles of fossil fuels, all together through innovation and green technology. This isn't just about saving the planet. It's about securing national survival and autonomy in a dangerous world. So what do we do with all of this? The story of 1973 and its stark echo in 2022 is not a dry history lesson. It is an urgent call to action for governments, industries, and every one of us as citizens and consumers. First, we must fully internalize that energy is the lifeblood of modern civilization, and whoever controls its flow holds immense power over our lives and our freedoms. Therefore, our collective mission must be to ensure that this power cannot be concentrated in the hands of those who would wield it as a cudgel. Second, energy independence is not a political slogan, it is a strategic imperative. For nations, this means making tough choices supporting responsible domestic energy sources while relentlessly investing in the renewable infrastructure of the future. For us as individuals, it means recognizing the power of our choices, installing solar panels, opting for an electric vehicle, improving our home's insulation. Every one of these actions is a brick in the wall of our collective security, reducing the leverage of any potential energy blackmailer. Third, we must be clear-eyed realists. The transition away from fossil fuels will take time. The world will still rely on oil and gas for years to come. But our goal must be to make that reliance as minimal, as diversified, and as resilient as possible, so that no single cartel and no single autocrat can ever hold entire continents hostage again. History repeated itself, not because we forgot it, but because we allowed ourselves to believe the old vulnerabilities were gone. Let's not make that mistake a second time. Look at gas prices, news about wind farms, or international LNG deals not just as economic data, but as dispatches from the front lines of global geopolitics. Because that is precisely what they are. Thank you for spending this time with us. We welcome your thoughts in the comments below, and we look forward to seeing you next time.